Joining me now to discuss the legacy of Bill 101 is the president and founder of the group Anglophones for Quebec Independence, Jennifer Drouin. Thank you very much for being here. Antoinette Mercurio is an Anglophone rights activist with the Unity Group, and Toula Drimonis is a writer, an editor, a journalist. Toula, thank you for being here. Let me start with you, Toula, the legacy of Bill 101.
Sure. I think it's watershed legislation that completely changed the linguistic and cultural landscape of this province. I think it was needed. I think it was very much needed. If you look back in history and you look at the Royal Commission on Biculturalism and Bilingualism, it was the findings of that commission made it very clear that the status of French Canadians in this province at the time, considering the large number of Francophones in this province, their status, their financial status, their political status, it just didn't merit what it was. It wasn't, you know, based on the numbers, their status wasn't what it should be, basically. So Bill 101 was needed, was desperately needed to correct wrongs. I think it was very vital. Now, I understand it's very, you know, it's a controversial. Bill 101 has always been, 40 years later, it's still, I find it very interesting how it still manages to create a lot of emotions, incite a lot of emotions to people. And I think sometimes fairly, sometimes, most of the times unfairly. I think people take it, they don't see it from a logical point of view of why it was desperately needed. I mean, we even forget that it was the Liberal Party that actually brought in Bill 22 and made French the public language of the province. You know, we tend to see it sometimes only in very narrow, from a narrow point of view, you know, and to take offense at some of the consequences, right? I mean, the Anglophone community obviously, in any case, in any scenario when there's a dynamic, a power differential, and all of a sudden when things are evened out, when things are balanced out, someone will, you know, the Anglophone community took a bit of a hit. I see things a little differently because I'm an allophone. I think Bill 101's legacy is that it has created this society here where not only is French protected and is thriving right now as far as I'm concerned, but also it has created, particularly here in Montreal, something that is very rare across Canada, which is a bilingual Anglo and the trilingual allophone, which I think is wonderful.
Antoinette, your thoughts on the legacy of Bill 101?
I think it never should have happened. It's being done to Canadian citizens, and I happen to be one of them, and I'm an immigrant, and it's being forced. French was never in decline, is still not in decline. There's nothing wrong with it. It should have been bilingual. How can you take away rights from a citizen, which is being done to Anglos? The moment that law came in, it destroyed Quebec's economy. Allophones left, Francophones left, companies just vamoosed right out of here, and we never got over it. And it just keep tightening the noose. So Bill 101 should be gone, and it won't be. And that's fine. And as far as allophones, you know, being trilingual because of the Bill 101, you know what? Bill 101 wasn't there when I went to school. And mon français est absolument parfait. Il est québécois. So no, Bill 101, no.
Jennifer, your position on Bill 101?
Well, I strongly disagree with what she just said because factually it's not true. Factually, we know that French has been in decline. Bill 101 was supposed to stop that, but unfortunately, most of the dispositions or the provisions of Bill 101 over the last 40 years have been weakened and cut out by the Supreme Court of Canada. So French is in decline. In Montreal in particular, we're at the 50% mark, and it's been for a very long time close to going under the 50% mark in Montreal. There's also, I'd like to see the proof of the decline of the economy, because the government usually tends to boast that the economy is doing great.
It's because the education is not there.
Nothing to, if anything, Bill 101 needs to be strengthened, and that's what the PQ is proposing to do if elected, is to bring in a Bill 202 in the first 101 days of a mandate after the upcoming election in 2018.
In what areas do you believe Bill 101 should be strengthened right now?
Well, for starters, the fact that a lot of allophones and are choosing to, and Francophones as well, are choosing to go to English CEGEPs and English universities. So one of the proposals would be to bring the funding for English CEGEPs in line with the funding of the proportion of Anglophones historically in the province, because Anglophones historically, according to the latest census, are only 8% of the province, but the funding that goes into, for instance, English CEGEPs and English universities or the English healthcare system is far beyond the 8% that historically the population would merit proportionally.
So a lot of Anglophone, or Francophone students, I should say, choose to go to Anglophone CEGEPs so that they can get more English. Toula, do you think that door should be closed by tightening or expanding Bill 101?
No. While I completely understand why Bill 101 was created, why it exists, why it still needs to remain here, I don't necessarily believe that it needs to be strengthened. I do feel that it has accomplished what it was, enacted to do. I think I disagree with Jen when she says that French is in decline. I don't. I've seen the stats, and with any how it works with statistics is any political party will take stats and they'll read them the way that it suits them. It's just it's inevitable, right? I don't think, and I think Montreal is very unique in the sense that you can't really look. Or even discuss the decline of French and just focus on Montreal. Montreal has always been a very distinct entity. It's very different from the rest of Quebec. It is a city where a lot of allophones, a lot of immigrants reside, and it changes the linguistic stats. And a lot of Francophones have also left the core of the city and have gone to the suburbs, which affects a lot of these stats. We also live in a reality right now where a lot of Francophones are I feel like 40 years later, we've come to a different point. The next generation, the kids of Bill 101 right now, I think are a different breed. They are children and adults, now adults obviously, 40 years later, of legislation that has allowed them to be perfectly bilingual. A lot of them don't have the linguistic chip on their shoulder that a lot of their parents had, whether Anglophone or Francophone. They see things much more globally. They are appreciative, I think, of how French is doing, but also are much more global-minded in the sense that they understand that English is something that is valuable to them because they don't know where their future lies, whether they'll leave the province, and they like having that ability to do so. I don't think it needs to be strengthened. I think right now the focus should be on the government ensuring that integration is key. When immigrants are coming here, whether from other provinces or from around the world, that the money we're investing financially in integration programs, in language programs, so that these people are integrated properly here, speak French adequately, are able to find jobs, are able to feel part of the society. I think Bill 101 it's important. I mean, even Julius Gray, who we all know was, a constitutional lawyer, a human rights lawyer, who was one of the people who initially had argued a lot of chapters of Bill 101. Even to this day, if you speak to him now, he'll tell you he actually believes that Bill 101 was instrumental in changing the linguistic landscape of the province, and actually he sees it as a plus because it allowed a lot of communities to kind of remove themselves from linguistic and cultural ghettos and to allowed for all of us to feel as Quebecers, to feel that we're Quebecers, that we're part of the society. And I think that's huge, that's vital to be part of it. And yeah, I understand where some of the frustration comes because when someone gains, someone loses. That's inevitable. It had to happen because if you look back at the commission, at the time, Francophones were making 35 to 40% less than Anglophones. 85% of management positions belong to Anglophones, which is ridiculous if you think that something like 90% of the province is Francophones. You have to see it. If you remove the emotional aspect of it and what it has, and I understand how it has affected people who maybe wanted to leave or had to leave.
You cannot trample on somebody else's rights because you think, not you,
Oh, I understand. I'm not taking it personally.
because somebody feels that their rights are being trampled on. It's equal rights for everybody, not just one.
But how?
There's never been any proof that rights have actually been trampled on. There's a difference between rights and privileges.
Do you want to know how I became?
Rights and privileges are different
how I became
things.
An activist?
Rights and privileges are different things.
I tried to order my computer with an English motherboard, and I could not, as a Canadian,
yes,
could
you
not.
can.
Really?
Yes,
I would
you
double
can.
check
You
that
can go to a Lenovo website and you can order your English computer. There is nothing in the law that prevents you. When we're talking about rights, you're talking about the
you try and order a computer, an English motherboard from Best Buy, and have it delivered to Quebec. You tell me what happens.
You can do it.
Jennifer.
I would go on the website and do it in 5 minutes just like that.
Let me tell you.
Do you recognize what some young Francophones, or maybe even many young Francophones, feel that English is an asset?
It's an asset, sure. But that doesn't mean that you have to put it above and beyond French. And there's
Oh, but
nothing
you can
that
put French
stops
above and
people
beyond.
from learning English in addition to going to, for instance, a French CEGEP. And when Toula was talking earlier about the rates of francisation of immigrants, that actually is a problem because it came out a couple of weeks ago. There was something like an abysmal rate of 9% of successful francisation, and that even among those people who were going through the programs, 90% were failing the programs.
I think that's where the money needs to go. I think that's where the focus needs to be right now. If we really, we need to walk the talk. If we're actually saying that this is important, that French is something that is a requirement and that we need to help people that are coming in from other provinces or either people here. I know people that are born and raised here and their French is really not very good. Vice versa too. I converse with a lot of Francophones who don't necessarily feel the need to speak English better. And you know what? There is another element. I know of a lot of Francophones who also feel that Bill 101 sometimes goes too far. There are always two sides to the story, who would like to have the opportunity to put their kids in English school if they wanted to, or feel it, interestingly enough, that Bill 101 has actually pacified people's urge for an independent Quebec, that it actually backfired because the fact that Quebec is unilingual now, it has pacified Francophones into not necessarily wanting independence. So it's interesting, I find it such a fascinating topic because depending on who you speak to and, which side of the coin you look at, it angers people, it frustrates people, and there are certain things about Bill 101 that frustrate me too. OQLF, the language police, as we like to call them, I really do think that sometimes we need to, it would be better if they backed off because we look ridiculous sometimes
Even Lucien Bouchard in
internationally.
1998 said it should be enforced in a way that doesn't give us a bad reputation.
It makes us look stupid sometimes. And even though I do understand the need for it, I mean, I don't think that an on button on a coffee maker in a restaurant is necessarily going to threaten the French language. And if it's threatened by that, then we need to really look at what's at stake here and what the problem is with the French language.
Is choice a right, Jennifer? Is choice a right? Do you recognize choice as a right? Like people to choose what school their kids go to, whether it's English or French, or whether, I choose something, I don't know, French over English, or just my right to choose.
A right is in the law, right? So there's a section of the Constitution that says if you were born in Canada, you have the right to go to an English school. That's a right. Nobody can take that away. If I want to send my kids to an English school, I can. That doesn't mean that people who haven't acquired that right should have that choice when there is a legitimate governmental reason to impose limits on that. So, for instance, people who are coming from who are immigrants who are coming from outside of here.
So their right to choose can be taken away.
It's not taking it away. It's that they've never acquired it in the first place because they weren't born here under what's called the Canada Clause. So those are different situations, and you have different categories based on whether the person is a native Canadian or not. So that's not a question of choice. Although you can choose to send your kids to a Francophone school if you want as well, and that's perfectly legitimate. So there's a difference between rights and privileges. And when we're talking about rights, I've never seen any evidence of people having the rights as Anglophones trampled. I have a right to send my kid to an English school if I want. I have a right to go into a hospital and be treated in English. I have a right to go to court and to have the proceedings happen in English, to get the judgment in English. Those are all rights. And those rights are actually in Bill 101 now, partially because of the Supreme Court ruling that they were necessary.
Can send their kids to English school?
A Francophone parent does not have the same rights because a Francophone is not an Anglophone. That's just a very simple question.
How could you distinguish between, you have different rights from an English to a French? Either you're Canadian and the rights are the same. You cannot say, you're English, you have these rights. You're French, you have a little bit more rights.
It's not a question of more or less rights.
But that's what you're saying.
It's based on a legitimate need that French is in decline. That was recognized by the Supreme Court of Canada, recognized that French was threatened.
You know what?
Across the board, French has been threatened and in decline for the last 40 years.
I want to answer a question that both of you were saying about allophones now coming in and being forced to go to French school because they need to learn it and whatever, and they're not enough learning it. I came here when I was 2 years old. I was forced to go to English school because Francophones did not allow me to go to French school.
And that's a frustration that I've heard from many
They pushed
allophones
me to
back
go
in the
to
day.
English school, but you know what? I came out of English school. Mon français est peut-être beaucoup meilleur que le tien. Moi, je parle
Mon français n'est pas pire non plus. J'ai fait une thèse sur le
Jennifer, il est
québécois.
magnifique. Mais je veux dire que quand j'avais 5 ou 6 ans, puis j'ai fait l'école en anglais, il n'y a personne qui m'a poussé. Tu dois apprendre le français. Moi, je l'ai appris parce que j'habitais au
But you know
Québec.
what, Antoinette,
Now,
the-
you push it, it's not happening.
But the thing is, Antoinette, yeah, your French
We're
might be
a
good,
joke.
and you may not have. And the same with
We're a
me.
joke.
I actually learned because I lived abroad for 10 years. I came back here to do my university. No one forced me to speak French or to learn French. It just seemed ridiculous for me to live in this province, to live in a predominantly French province and not speak French and not be able to converse with people around me or to completely understand.
If we lived in Japan, we would speak Japanese.
And
Why would you
everyone
not
has a
speak
different
French in
affinity.
Quebec?
And everyone has a different affinity for learning
Montreal
languages and so forth.
should be a bilingual city. I understand that Bill 101 will never disappear. Perhaps tone it down a little bit. Okay, I don't agree with it, but tone it down and don't enforce it.
40
So would
years.
you make Edmonton a bilingual city? And would you make Winnipeg a bilingual city?
Yes.
What about all
I
of
will
the
go
Franco-Manitobans? What
She
about the
says yes.
Acadians?
I will
Yes,
go
she says
stand
yes.
for those francophone people.
40 years later.
And have you been standing for them for the last 40
I'm
years?
not
But
aware.
even
I'm
Francophone,
here.
40 years later, 40 years
here.
later, Bill 101 is still what it always has been, a polarizing issue and one that affects us emotionally. Jennifer, Antoinette, Toula, thank you so much.
We need an hour.
We don't have one.